Okay, everyone. Uh, this is uh, this is your last verb tense that you will have to learn. We're going to talk about the perfect indicative. And although I usually remind you, or I try to remind you, to follow along in your textbook, I really mean it this time. I want you to pause this, grab your textbook, and go to chapter 25 because we're going to be moving through the text. Some of the slides, you probably already know this, but I don't build the slide presentation. The people that put the textbook together, they build it and they allow me to edit it. So I add some stuff. Sometimes I take it away. But the slides just, in some instances, it would have created too much text on the slide for me to try to put bullet points. And so there's a few places we're going to be going into the textbook and just reading directly from the text. I will tell you that the perfect indicative is theologically one of the more interesting tenses, and we'll get into it in just a minute. Pretty straightforward in terms of being able to identify it, because it's formed differently than verbs that you've learned up to this point. But there are a few rules that apply, and you got to learn those rules to get the translation. So for this week, or for this unit rather, you're really going to want to lean into your workbook assignments and practice recognizing and translating some of the perfect indicative or perfect tense, not just indicative, but the perfect tense. So let's just get right in. The In the English, when we talk about things that are done in the past, well, first of all, we don't have in the English an equivalent to the Greek perfect tense. So what you're going to see in just a few minutes is we're going to add helping verbs or to be verbs, depending on the context, to translate it. Now, when you're just going through and doing your paradigms, you're just going to learn the helping verbs. But we'll get into it. But there is no perfect equivalent. So in English, when we describe a past action, we just say, I wrote. Sometimes we use helping verbs like have and has to communicate that the action was done in the past, but that the statement is accurate at the time that we either write or speak. So a simple action in the past would be I wrote. It's just communicating that at some point in the past, you wrote. But if we want to communicate that that past action is still accurate at this time, or the thing that you wrote is accurate, you would say, I have written. If we wanted to try to communicate the Greek perfect tense in this situation, saying either I wrote or I've written, we would say it is written. That would be the closest thing that we have in English to the Greek perfect tense. That's why if you're reading through the New Testament, you're reading through the Gospels, and Jesus says, it is written. Do you not know that it is written? Those are all in the perfect tense. And the translators are having to add the verb is in order to communicate it into English. So, so a so a an example of the perfect tense in English. We don't have the perfect tense, but if you're trying to get the closest to the perfect tense, still using this example about I wrote or I have written. It is written that you shall not exceed the speed limit. Because what you're saying is that something was written in the past, but that thing that was written in the past still applies at the moment that I'm speaking or at the moment that I'm writing this down. So it is written means that there is both a past action and a present consequence. So let's look at the Greek perfect tense. I'm straight from the book here. The perfect is action that was brought to completion and whose effects are felt in the present. So it was past action that has present implications. And the examples here that they give in the textbook, Jesus has died. That is an aorist, just in the past, right? It is written, or it stands written, would be in the perfect. All right. Jesus is risen, right? He's still risen. It happened in the past, and he's still risen. So he introduces a new word. I don't know that you need to spend too much time on this, but he uses it, so I want to make sure that you understand what he's saying. If you look at page 277, section 25.3, he introduces the term combinative. I think he made that word up. That's fine. But in order to sort of find a word that might help students understand the perfect tense, he's come up with the word combinative or combinative, if you want to say it that way. The perfect tense combines, see, he's using the word combine. The perfect tense combines the aspect of the aorist, which is completed action, with the present, which is ongoing action. So if that helps you to remember, then that it may be easier for you to remember that word when it comes to translating than to try to remember some of the other things I've said. When you translate the perfect tense, I said this in the beginning, you'll use a helping verb if the emphasis is on completion, have or has, not had, and you'll use sort of the present tense. I hate to even say present tense. You'll use the present in English if the emphasis is on current implications. And he says here, the kingdom of God is near. Both of those are examples of using the rules that we have in English to best capture what the New Testament writers are saying in Greek. And I really don't think there's really any there's no better example of the challenge of accurately translating God's word from the original language into English or Spanish or French or Italian or any other language, right? The challenge is and has always been making sure that the way that you translate it from Greek into whatever language, we'll just say English, the challenge is you want to make sure that you, as closely as you possibly can, reflect the intention of the author, the original author, in how you translate it. That's why using a good Bible translation is paramount. And it's this sort of thing that causes people to argue about the nuances of which translation is better. Now, those of you that know me and take my theology classes, you know that generally speaking, I like the New International Version. I'll find places in the NIV where I think the translation could be better, and I'll defer to the ESV or I actually think the New American Standard is probably the best English translation. The challenge with the New American Standard is that it lacks some of the, I don't want to say nuances, but it lacks some of the dynamic aspect that you get from the NIV or the NASB or the ESV. And this is why I never use the King James Version. I don't use the King James Version because it requires double translation. It requires translation from Greek to medieval English, really, yeah, medieval English, and then translating from medieval English to modern English. And every time you translate a language, you lose something every single time. And also the King James is, we have, there have been discoveries in copies of letters and texts that didn't exist at the time they wrote the King James. And so it's really not based on as good of historical documents as some of the later 20th century translations. It's a decent translation. I think the translators did a fair job. I'll give them a B, B plus. But anyway, I didn't mean to go off on that tangent. Just so that you know that the perfect tense is a really good example of something that exists in Greek that is impossible to fully translate or capture in English. So we have to not get creative, but we have to rely on solid English grammar rules and apply them consistently so that we can get a consistent translation each time. All right, enough of that. So let's look at the first perfect active indicative. And we are on page 278, section 25.6. So we're introducing an aspect of Greek grammar here that you haven't seen yet, and that is the reduplication. Now, we're going to just show you the reduplication in these paradigms that we're going to cover, and then later we're going to go over some rules for reduplication. But here's what you have. So in the first perfect active indicative, you have a reduplication of the first consonant of the word. Now we're doing luo, I loose, right? So we're trying to come up with the perfect tense, which is past action that means something today. And so we're going to use the helping verb have or has, right? Not had, H-A-D, just has or have. And so we're looking for I have, you have, he has loosed, right? That's what we're trying to communicate. So the reduplication, you see the first letter there and go all the way to the end of that, and you say lelu comment, right? So we know that lambda upsilon is the stem. That's what we're looking for, the perfect active tense stem, right? And so we're adding a reduplication to that, which is going to be a reduplication of the first consonant, in this case, plus an epsilon, plus a tense formative, or plus the stem, plus a tense formative, which is kappa alpha, and then the endings. So you're going to look for clues when you're trying to identify the perfect tense. And it is that reduplication that's going to clue you into the fact that you're dealing with a perfect tense. In the same way that the augment, you look for the augment in some of the other tenses that you've studied, or verb tenses that you've studied, right? So the first perfect active indicative, you've got the reduplication plus the perfect active tense stem, the tense formative, which is the kappa alpha, and then your personal ending. So let's see what that looks like in the paradigm. Here we go. Leluka, I have loosed. Lelukas, you have loosed. Leluken, he has loosed. Lelukamen, we have loosed. Lelukate, you have loosed. And lelukase, kasi, they have loosed. So you see there, you've got the reduplication. And we're calling the reduplication not just the lambda, but the lambda plus the epsilon. But the reason the reduplication is not written in this slide here as just lambda epsilon, there's a plus between them, is because we're going to look at some rules that are going to change whether this is an epsilon or not. That's the reason it's written like this. I almost think we should have went over the rules here, but we're going to go over it later. So just remember that when you're looking at your words in your sentences, trying to translate, or you're looking at your words, you're trying to parse them. This reduplication of the first consonant is going to be the dead giveaway for you. Other than that, the kappa alpha is going to be a giveaway, but it's that reduplication that's really going to help you. So that's the first perfect active indicative. I have loosed. All right, now let's look at the first perfect middle and passive. Now there's a little bit of a difference here with the first perfect middle and passive. You still have the reduplication. You have no tense formative and no connecting vowel. So you just have the reduplication, which is in this case is the lambda epsilon. Then you have the stem, which is the lambda upsilon. I'm sorry, I think I said upsilon first. So the reduplication, lambda epsilon, plus a stem, lambda upsilon, plus a personal ending, you end up with lelomai. So this is the first perfect middle and passive. So the first one was the active, right? Now we're looking at middle and passive. Now the difference between the way you're going to translate the active versus the middle or passive is, and go back up to this slide, the active, I, you, he, we, you, they, have, or has. That's how you're going to translate, for the most part, unless context tells you to translate it with is or are. Context will tell you. But with the middle and the passive, have or has been, right? So this is a little easier to pick out because you don't have in the active, you have this tense formative. You don't have the tense formative in the middle and the passive. You just have the reduplication, which is a duplication of that lambda plus that vowel, which in this case is an epsilon. Lelumai, lelusai, lelutai, lelumatha, leluste, leluntai. That is, I have been loosed, you have been loosed, he has been loosed, we have been loosed, so on and so forth. So that is the first. Let's go look at it again. So this is the first perfect active. You have the reduplication, the stem, the tense formative, kappa alpha. That's in the first perfect active. First perfect middle, you just have the reduplication, the stem, and the ending. So it's the first active, first middle, and now let's look at the second active. Second active, there's your reduplication. We're dealing with genomai, right? The reduplication is the gamma and the epsilon, the stem, and the tense formative. The difference between the first and the second perfect active indicative is that the tense formative in the first is a kappa alpha, and in the second, it's just an alpha. And it's not very many words at all. If you want to look on section 25.16, jumping ahead a little bit. Yeah. So jumping ahead to section 25.16, I'm just going to read straight from the book here. And I think this is important. I don't want you to spend a ton of time on second perfect, but you need to know it. But here's what Mounce has to say about second perfect. There are only a few second perfect actives in the New Testament, so they don't warrant a major discussion. It's not save your brain power for something else. You need to learn it, but in the grand scheme of things, they are identical to the first perfect, that they use the tense formative, except that they use the tense formative alpha and not kappa alpha. And you've learned 5 verbs that when they appear in the perfect active, they're going to appear like this. So what you're looking at here, let's look at akuo, I hear, right? This is the stem, aku. The omega is the is the ending, right? The personal ending. So akuo, you can see here that it lengthens, and we're going to see this again, but it lengthens that alpha. So the alpha here and the eta here are the same. It's just the eta is the lengthening of the alpha. And we're going to see that again. But these five verbs are the verbs that you would see in the second perfect active. All right. Time out. Just going to go back, make sure that you understand it. All right. Perfect is action that was brought to completion and whose effects are felt in the present. It's something that happened then, but it still applies in the present. When I say in the present, it applies. It happened in the past, and it applies at the time that you're speaking, or at the time that you wrote something down. Okay, it's a really important point, but you can't really go any further than that. But I want you to just be specific with that. To help you understand it, he's created the word combinative. If that helps you, it combines aorist with present. And here is the first perfect indicative. Oops, went away. You have the reduplication, stem, and the tense formative. You're going to translate the first perfect with have or has. Then you have the middle passive, first perfect middle passive. You have the reduplication, the stem, and you do not have the tense formative or connecting vowel. Right? You just have the ending. And you're going to translate it, I have been. And then for those five verbs that exist as second perfect active, right? If it's perfect active, you're just going to use have or has. If it's middle, if it's middle or passive, it's going to have been, has been. So this second perfect active, you're going to translate those with have or has. And those are five verbs that you'll need to know. Okay. Those are the paradigms. These are the last paradigms you're going to have to learn related to the verbs. Not the last paradigm. Life ain't that good. But these are the last paradigms that you'll have to remember for verbs. Now let's talk about some of the rules. We're going to move forward here. Let's see. I want you to go ahead and turn to page 280 in your textbook. And let's go through some of these rules that you're going to have to apply so that you can recognize and translate the perfect tense. So let's move our slides up. Okay. So this is where I'm going to start just reading from the book because I couldn't put all this in slides and it just would have been too busy. So let's try to get a better understanding of reduplication, and let's go to section 25.10. And I'll just read here. Kind of already seen this, but the most notable difference in form between the perfect and other tenses is the reduplication, right? The fact that it is so obvious makes identification of the perfect relatively easy. When you see that reduplication, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I know. So here are some rules that apply to reduplication when the word starts with a consonant. So this is 25.10, and then the number 1 right below that, consonantal reduplication. That just, if a verb begins with a single consonant, luo. If the verb begins with a single consonant, that consonant is reduplicated, and the two consonants are separated by an epsilon. So if you have a single consonant, if a verb begins with a single consonant, that consonant is going to appear again, and you're going to put an epsilon in the middle. That's going to be, I don't know if it's the majority, but it's going to be a significant number of the verbs that you encounter. All right, you got that? So you see right here, luo. Luo starts with a lambda, right? So you're going to duplicate that lambda. You're going to separate that duplication, by an epsilon. If the consonant that was reduplicated is a phi, chi, or theta, we're going to skip one here and go down here to theta rho, right? So obviously, um, that's a single consonant, but there's an exception. If it's a single consonant, but it's a phi, chi, or theta, and that's these last three here, then you're going to change the reduplicated consonant. The reduplicated consonant is the one that's coming first. I know that sounds a little backwards, but so luo, take luo for example. Luo begins with a lambda. You're adding this lambda and epsilon. So even though in letter order for the word, it comes before this lambda, it's called a reduplication because it appears according to whatever this first letter is here. So the reduplicated consonant is the first consonant, the lambda here. So if the word begins with a phi, chi, or a theta, then the reduplicated consonant is going to change based on these rules. The phi is going to change. It's going to make the reduplicated letter a pi. And it has everything to do with how it sounds. So see, the phi remains and the pi is added, separated by an epsilon. If a word begins with a chi, chi remains. The reduplicated sound becomes K, the kappa, separated by epsilon. If it's a theta, in the perfect tense, the theta remains. The reduplicated theta becomes a tau, separated by an epsilon. And if you tried to say these words, right? If you try to keep the rules, like this first rule, which was if it's a single consonant, then you just duplicate that consonant and you separate it with an epsilon. If you tried that here, right? Just saying the first three letters here, fon. Fefon would be what the word would be without this rule. But pefon is easier to say than fefon. Same here. Car. Kekar is how you would say that. But the K sound, that kappa, is really what you're doing. So it changes it to kind of match acoustically what you're saying. I think you get it without me really going into any further detail. But these rules are under number one here. And the only other rule is that I don't know where it is here. I think it's, let me see where this rule is here. So this is, so ekbalo, if you look on page 281, number 3, if it's a compound verb, meaning that ek means out of, balo means I throw, I cast out, or I throw out is what the meaning of ekbalo is. So you have two different words. It's a compound word. And so the rule is, we'll just read here from number 3 at the top of page 281, a compound verb reduplicates the verbal part of a compound verb, just like the imperfect and aorist augment the verbal part of a compound. So you can see that it's augmenting here, right? So the ek remains the same. So you have to recognize ekbalo. You see that what you're doing is you're essentially augmenting and dropping that alpha. So the reduplication is here. Ek remains the same. I know that it's going to be confusing. That's a lot of rules, but unfortunately, um, it's part of the perfect tense. So that's why we're spending more time on the rules than we did on the paradigms. All right. So that's consonantal reduplication. That's when words begin with a consonant. If the words, and we're on page 280, number 2, down at the bottom. So you have consonantal reduplication, and we're going to call this vocalic reduplication. This is when a word begins with either a vowel or a diphthong. So if a word begins with a vowel or a diphthong in the present tense, you're just going to lengthen the vowel or the diphthong. And this is where you're going to have to put your thinking cap on, and you're going to have to know that alpha is lengthened to eta. Now, we've looked at this in other parts of the book before. So just review those sections. You're just going to see it lengthen. But it's going to be a giveaway, right? Because you're going to be able to see that reduplication. Not going to spend a lot of time on contract verbs. If you go back to chapter 17, you can review contract verbs, but essentially a contract verb just ends in alpha, epsilon, or omicron. In the perfect tense, that contract vowel is just lengthened. That's really all it is. And you can see that. You can see on section 25.15. For an example, it's on here too, agapao, agapeka. All right. I know that's a lot. You're really going to have to dive into your workbook this week to really understand that. Use your textbook alongside you, because outside of the textbook, like if you just open your workbook and start working, there's not a snowball's chance that you would be able to recognize agapeka in a sentence as a form of agapao unless you've learned to recognize those stems and you learn to recognize that reduplication and that lengthening of that reduplication. So use your textbook to help you implement these rules as you do the workbook. Take your time. This is the only chapter that's due this week. So break your days up. You've got a midterm exam at the end of this week, but take your time with these rules. Take your time with the workbook. You don't have as many vocabulary words this week, so it's not like you need to spend a ton of time on brand new vocabulary. In fact, we'll go ahead and just look at the three vocabulary words that you have for this new section is ateo, I ask or I demand. Malan, more or rather. Martyreo, I bear witness, I testify. This is where we get the word martyr from. Martyreo. So only 3 vocabulary words. So on the surface of it, the perfect is not really that difficult, right? Because you know that you have reduplication, you have the stem, you have the tense formative if it's an active, first perfect active. If it's a middle or passive, it's just not going to have that tense formative, but it's going to have that reduplication. The challenge is in some of those details when it begins with a phi or a theta or a chi, or if it begins with a diphthong or a vowel, like that's where the hard work comes into this, comes into the perfect tense. I will tell you this, that to the best of your ability, learn to see the lengthening vowels as extensions of the other vowels. For instance, learn that the eta is a long A, if that's a good way to remember it. So that when you see an alpha and an eta close together, separated by that epsilon if it's an active. It wouldn't be separated by an epsilon if it were a perfect or a middle. I mean, it would. I'm talking about the tense formative. Um, my dog's trying to get in. Sorry. So, so just learn that, like, if you see an alpha and you see an eta together, okay, is this a perfect tense? Go to your book, look at the rules, and learn to begin to identify it by using your textbook to help you with your workbook. All right. I wish that I could do more than just tell you this stuff. I wish I could help you remember it. But you know by now there's only one way to learn it, and that is to dig in with your workbook assignments, is to dig in with memorizing these these personal endings, memorizing these tense formatives, memorizing these reduplications. It's just memorization. That's all it is. And I would say that out of all the things you've had to learn, um, generally speaking, this is not the hardest. There are just a few more rules to it. So that is chapter 25, the perfect tense. We are moving on from chapter 25. Chapter 26, we're going to start participles. And that's essentially adding ing to stuff. And so we'll learn participles. But dig in, lean into your workbook, and think that you can master this, but you can't master it without practicing it. You're going to have to practice this. So happy learning. Thanks for paying attention. I'll see you guys next time. Stop sharing. And there we go.